My name is Maya. I am 32 years old. It was pouring rain in Atlanta the night my entire world shattered. I stood shivering on the grand front porch of my parents' sprawling suburban estate soaked to the bone. My three young children pressed against my legs for warmth. Leo, who was just 8 years old, held tightly to the hands of his 5-year-old twin sisters, Mia and Zoe. In my own hands, I gripped two heavy black garbage bags containing everything we had left in the world. The massive oak door swung open. My father, Pastor Calvin, a man who preached about grace and family every Sunday to thousands at his megachurch, stood in the warm, dry entryway. He looked at my soaking wet children. He looked at the garbage bags. Then his eyes met mine with absolute disdain. Before I could even beg for a place to sleep, he coldly shut the door right in my face. I heard the deadbolt slide into place. A second later, the window on the second floor slid open. My older brother Jamal leaned out into the pouring rain. "There is no room for you here," he shouted, his voice dripping with annoyance. My phone vibrated in my wet pocket. It was a text from my sister Nia calling me an impulsive fool who ruined her own life. I picked up the soaking garbage bags, turned my back on the multi-million-dollar mansion, and led my crying children back to my rusted sedan. I buckled them in, stared through the rain-streaked windshield at the house of the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and whispered 3 words to myself. Just you wait. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who abandoned you when you had nowhere else to go. My journey from that freezing driveway to the ultimate payback is something you will definitely want to hear. Just 12 hours before I found myself standing in that freezing rain, I thought I had a stable life. My husband Darren was the chief financial officer of a major wealth management firm in downtown Atlanta. We lived in a beautiful house in a prestigious neighborhood. I had paused my own highly successful career in crisis public relations to raise our 3 children and support his corporate climb. I managed our home, hosted his networking dinners, and played the perfect executive wife. I thought we were building an empire together. I was completely wrong. That morning started like any other Tuesday. Darren told me he had an early breakfast meeting with investors and left the house by 6. After dropping the kids off at school, I returned home to clean the kitchen. That was when I noticed he had left his secure work laptop on the kitchen island. Darren never went anywhere without it. Thinking I was doing him a massive favor, I grabbed the laptop and drove straight to his corporate office building. I smiled at the security guards, rode the private elevator up to the executive suite, and walked right into his office without knocking. Darren was not having a breakfast meeting with investors. I found my husband of 10 years tangled up on the leather sofa with his 24-year-old secretary, Chloe. They were not even trying to hide it. The shock hit me so hard my vision blurred. I dropped the laptop. It hit the floor with a loud crack, snapping them out of their sickening moment. Chloe shrieked and scrambled for her clothes, pulling her blouse over her head as she darted out the side door. I stood there, unable to breathe, waiting for Darren to fall to his knees. I waited for the apologies, the excuses, the desperate pleas for forgiveness. Instead, Darren calmly stood up, adjusted his expensive tailored suit, and looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. He did not say he was sorry. He did not show an ounce of guilt. He walked over to his desk, poured himself a glass of water, and laughed. "What are you going to do about it, Maya?" he sneered, taking a slow sip. "Are you going to divorce me? With what money? You have not earned a single paycheck in 8 years. You are completely dependent on me. You have no income, no recent career history, and no power here. Go home, pack your bags, and get out of my house by tonight. If you make a scene, I will drag you through court and take the kids. I own everything. You own nothing." The sheer audacity of his words paralyzed me for exactly 3 seconds. The man I had loved, the man I sacrificed my ambitions for, was looking at me like I was an insect he had just stepped on. He thought because I had traded my high-powered public relations career for motherhood, I had somehow lost my mind and my teeth. He thought I was weak. He completely forgot who I was before I became his wife. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not throw things. The panic inside my chest instantly crystallized into cold, hard survival instinct. I turned and walked out of his office without saying a single word. I drove straight back to our house. The clock was ticking. I knew Darren well enough to know he would act fast to lock me out of our assets, but I needed to act faster. I grabbed 2 large garbage bags from the kitchen pantry and sprinted upstairs. I did not bother packing my designer dresses or the expensive jewelry Darren had bought me over the years. Those were chains masquerading as gifts. I packed my children's favorite clothes, their school uniforms, their warmest jackets, and their most comforting toys. I packed my old business documents, my personal hard drive, and the few sentimental items my grandmother had given me before she passed away. By the time the clock struck 3 in the afternoon, I was waiting in the school pickup line. When Leo, Mia, and Zoe climbed into the back seat of my car, I forced the brightest, most reassuring smile I could muster onto my face. I told them we were going on a surprise adventure to visit their grandparents. They cheered, unaware that our lives had just been violently uprooted. As I drove toward my parents' estate in the affluent suburbs of Atlanta, I tried to formulate a plan. My father, Pastor Calvin, was a highly influential figure in the community. He led a massive megachurch with thousands of wealthy congregants. My mother, Beatrice, was the ultimate socialite, obsessed with appearances and status. They were not warm or nurturing people, but they were my parents. I believed that despite our complicated history, they would never turn their backs on their own daughter and grandchildren in a moment of absolute crisis. I believed they would offer us a warm bed for the night while I figured out my next legal move against Darren. I pulled into their long, winding driveway just as the sky turned a bruised purple and the rain began to fall in heavy sheets. I parked the car, grabbed the 2 garbage bags, and ushered my kids through the downpour toward the towering front doors. My heart was pounding against my ribs. I rehearsed what I would say. I would tell them about Chloe. I would tell them about the cruel way Darren had discarded me. I would ask for just a few days of shelter. But as I stood on that porch, soaked and shivering, watching my father shut the heavy oak door in my face, the brutal reality crashed down on me. My family did not care about my pain. They only cared about how my broken marriage would affect their perfect image. My sister Nia texted me to stop embarrassing the family name. My brother Jamal told me to get lost because I was inconveniencing him. They looked at my 3 innocent children shivering in the cold rain and decided their social standing was more important than our survival. When I walked back to my car that night, wiping the freezing rain from my face, the last remaining thread of loyalty I had for my family snapped completely. I was truly alone. Darren thought he had destroyed me. My parents thought they could discard me like trash. They all looked at a mother backed into a corner and saw a victim. They failed to realize that a mother backed into a corner is the most dangerous force on earth. As I put the car in drive and pulled away from the gates of my parents' mansion, I wiped my tears away for the last time. I was done crying. It was time to go to war. The rain battered the windshield of my rusted sedan as I navigated the slick Atlanta streets away from the imposing gates of my parents' estate. The silence in the back seat was deafening. Leo had wrapped his arms protectively around his little sisters, and exhaustion had finally claimed all 3 of them. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My mind raced through the immediate logistics of survival. We needed shelter. The luxury hotels downtown were out of the question, without a reservation or a clear financial picture. So I drove toward the outskirts of the city. I pulled into the flickering neon glow of a cheap Motel 6. The lobby smelled of stale coffee and industrial bleach. I paid for a single night in cash, using the emergency money I always kept tucked inside the lining of my purse. It was a meager sum, barely enough to cover the room and some snacks from the vending machine. The room itself was a grim reality check. The floral bedspreads were faded, the wallpaper peeled at the corners, and the single window looked out over a desolate parking lot. But it had a solid door with a lock. Right now, that was the only luxury we could afford. I tucked the children into one of the squeaky double beds, pulling the thin blankets up to their chins. They were so resilient, so innocent. Watching their chests rise and fall in the dim light, a fierce protective fire ignited in my chest. I wiped the remaining rain from my face and pulled my laptop from the bottom of my bag. I set it up on the rickety laminate desk in the corner of the room, plugging it into the wall outlet. The screen flared to life, casting harsh light. Darren was a financial executive. I knew his mind worked in numbers and ledgers and calculated risks and brutal cuts. I had to secure my funds before he realized I had a contingency plan. We had a joint savings account, a substantial nest egg of $150,000 that we had built together over the first 5 years of our marriage back when I was still bringing in massive retainers from my public relations firm. It was my money just as much as it was his. I planned to transfer half of it to a private secure account. I had opened it years ago and never used it, just enough to secure a lease on a townhouse and hire a ruthless divorce attorney. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I logged into the banking portal, navigating the two-factor authentication with practiced ease. The dashboard loaded. I stared at the screen. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and leaned closer, the harsh light reflecting in my pupils. The number staring back at me did not make sense. The joint savings account, the safety net I had relied on, read exactly $14.00. A cold sweat broke. It broke out across the back of my neck. I clicked on the transaction history. Darren had not just transferred the money, he had systematically dismantled our financial life over the past 48 hours. Massive wire transfers to offshore holding accounts, cashier checks drawn in varying amounts. He had drained every single penny of the $150,000. He had left exactly $14, an insulting, deliberate slap in the face. It was a message loud and clear. He wanted me completely destitute. I stared at those 2 digits, the cruel simplicity of what my life became. I had sacrificed my own thriving business, surrendered my corporate independence, and poured all of my ambition into raising his children and maintaining his immaculate public persona. I had managed his charity galas, smiled for his promotion photos, and played the ultimate supportive partner. In return, he had completely dismantled my security with a few simple keystrokes. It was a brutal awakening. Panic, sharp and metallic, tasted like blood in the back of my throat. I quickly pulled out my wallet and grabbed my primary credit card, a high-limit platinum card I often used for basic daily household expenses. I logged into the credit portal. Account frozen. I checked the secondary card. Account closed. I checked the emergency visa. Reported stolen by primary account holder. He had cut off every financial artery. Darren had executed a flawless, premeditated financial execution. He knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted me to crawl back to him on my knees, begging for a roof over my children's heads, willing to accept his infidelity just to survive. He thought breaking my bank account would break my spirit. He thought I would look at that $14 balance and surrender completely to him. He was entirely dead wrong. The walls of the cheap motel room seemed to close in on me. I listened to the steady, rhythmic breathing of my children and forced myself to match their pace. Inhale. Exhale. Panic is the enemy of strategy. That was the first rule of crisis management I used to teach my corporate clients. You do not react to the blow. You analyze the battlefield. Darren had the high ground, the resources, and the element of surprise, but he had made one fatal miscalculation. He had greatly underestimated my intelligence. I closed the laptop with purpose. The $14 balance burned in my memory, not as a symbol of defeat, but as the exact price of my freedom. I needed a war chest, and I needed it immediately. I could not fight a financial shark without capital. I needed a rapid injection of cash to secure a safe environment for Mia and Zoe before the morning light broke. There was only one door left to knock on, even if it was made of solid ice. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the number I knew by heart. It rang 4 times before answering. My mother, Beatrice, picked up. The line connected, bringing the faint, elegant hum of classical music playing in the background of her sprawling estate. Maya. Beatrice sighed, her voice dripping with extreme exhaustion. Do you have any idea what time it is? Your father and I are trying to decompress. Mom, I need your help, I said, keeping my voice steady, refusing to let her hear the tremor of desperation. I am at a motel. Darren drained all the bank accounts and froze my credit cards. He left us with absolutely nothing. I just need a short-term loan today. $2,000 to put a deposit down on an apartment so the kids have a safe place to stay while I figure out my next legal move. A sharp, disapproving sound echoed through the receiver. $2,000. Beatrice scoffed. Maya, you must be out of your mind. We do not have that kind of liquid cash just sitting around to indulge your dramatic tantrums. I gripped the phone tighter. You and Dad run a massive ministry. You drive imported cars. I am your daughter, and your grandchildren are sleeping on a stained mattress in a shady motel room. $2,000 is nothing to you. Do not you dare take that tone with me. Beatrice snapped the pristine Southern Belle facade, dropping instantly. We are currently funding Jamal and Kiara new luxury home interior in Buckhead. Custom Italian marble countertops and imported hardwood floors are not cheap, Maya. Your brother is building a real estate empire and he needs a home that reflects his elite status in this city. We are investing in a winner. We cannot throw money at a woman who just blew up her own marriage because she does not know how to be quiet. The words hit me like a physical strike. I stared at the peeling wallpaper of the motel room, completely stunned. You are choosing Jamal imported countertops over your own grandchildren, having a safe roof over their heads. Beatrice let out a long, theatrical sigh. I am choosing family stability, Maya. Let us be honest about what happened today. You walked into Darren's office and made a horrific scene. You jeopardized his professional reputation. Darren is a highly respected chief financial officer in Atlanta. Men with his level of power and wealth occasionally stumble. You should have handled this completely privately. You should have smiled and dealt with it behind closed doors, like a woman of class, Beatrice said. Instead, you got yourself thrown out. I was stunned. Mom, he cheated on me. He stole my money. And whose fault is that? Beatrice countered. You forgot how to cater to a powerful man. Listen carefully. You will drive back tomorrow and beg him to forgive your impulsive outburst. That is how you survive. Do not call again until you fix the mess you created. A sharp click echoed in my ear. I was completely, utterly, and entirely on my own today. The dead tone hummed against my ear for a long moment before I slowly lowered the phone. I did not cry. I did not scream. The betrayal from my own mother acted as a cauterizing iron, burning away the final shreds of my vulnerability. I set the phone on the cheap laminate desk and looked over at my sleeping children. They were my only focus now. Morning arrived with a harsh glare slicing through the gap in the faded motel curtains. The digital clock on the bedside table read 7 in the morning. Before I could even gather my thoughts to plan breakfast, a sharp, aggressive knock hammered against the heavy metal door. I froze. My first instinct was that Darren had sent the police to drag me back to the house to further humiliate me. I peered through the scratched peephole and saw a man in a gray uniform holding a thick manila envelope. I cracked the door open, keeping the chain firmly engaged. "Are you Maya Sterling?" he asked, his voice bored and completely mechanical. I nodded slowly. He shoved the envelope through the narrow gap, turned on his heel, and walked away without another word. I locked the door and ripped open the seal. It was an emergency ex parte custody motion filed by Darren and his high-powered legal team. I read the documents and my blood instantly turned to ice. Darren was petitioning the court for immediate full physical and legal custody of Leo, Mia, and Zoe. His grounds for the emergency order were sickeningly calculated. He claimed I was experiencing a severe mental breakdown. He stated I had kidnapped the children from their stable home environment. Most brutally, he listed me as entirely homeless and financially unstable, declaring me legally unfit to provide basic necessities for my own kids. He had orchestrated my financial ruin 12 hours ago, specifically to use it as legal ammunition today. He weaponized the fact that I had given up my career to raise his family, using my lack of current income as proof of my incompetence. He wanted to leave me with absolutely nothing, not even my own children. I sat on the edge of the squeaky mattress, staring at the legal threats printed on the crisp white paper. Darren expected me to panic. He expected me to call him sobbing, begging for mercy, offering to return home and endure his infidelity just to keep my kids under my roof. He thought he had backed a desperate, isolated housewife into an inescapable corner. He assumed my silence yesterday was submission, but as I read the final page, a profound psychological shift occurred inside me. The paralyzing grief, the suffocating shock, and the lingering pain of my family and their ultimate rejection simply vanished. In their place, a cold, hyper-focused survival instinct took root. Darren had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He had stripped away the comfortable suburban life that kept my true capabilities dormant. He had removed the loyal wife who managed his calendar and smiled obligingly at his corporate dinners. By taking away my safety net, he had resurrected the woman I was before I ever put on his wedding ring. Before Darren, I was not just a supportive partner. I was one of the most ruthless and brilliant crisis public relations strategists in the Southeast. I handled catastrophic corporate scandals, political meltdowns, and media fires that no one else could extinguish. I had retired at the peak of my game to build Darren his perfect empire. Now I was going to use those exact elite skills to completely decimate him. But to fight a monster with unlimited legal resources, I needed heavy capital, and I needed it by sundown. I woke the children, dressed them quickly, and drove straight to a local coffee shop a few miles away from the motel. I bought them breakfast sandwiches and set them up with coloring books in a quiet corner booth far from the morning rush. I connected my laptop to the free public Wi-Fi and opened a fresh browser window. I needed a target. I scanned the morning news headlines looking for blood in the water. I found it in exactly 3 minutes. State Senator Marcus Vance, a highly prominent and previously untouchable politician, was facing total career annihilation. A massive scandal had broken overnight involving embezzled campaign funds and a highly controversial leaked audio recording. The morning news anchors were already drafting his political obituary. The articles noted that his longtime elite public relations agency had dropped him immediately to avoid the collateral damage to their own brand. He was politically bleeding to death, and no top-tier firm in Atlanta would touch him. It was the perfect opportunity. I pulled up my old encrypted contact directory. While other desperate PR agents would have tried to go through his panicked chief of staff, I had his direct personal cell phone number from a charity gala we attended years ago. I dialed the number, shielding my mouth from the noise of the espresso machines. He answered on the second ring, his voice tight with barely suppressed panic. "Marcus, this is Mia Sterling," I said, skipping all professional pleasantries. "I know your entire team is panicking and your current PR firm just threw you to the wolves. I am looking at the fallout right now. You are exactly 12 hours away from a forced resignation and a federal indictment." "Mia," he breathed, sounding utterly desperate. "Everyone is jumping ship. The recording is everywhere. I am completely finished. You are only finished if you keep playing defense." I snapped, my tone radiating absolute authority. "You are bleeding out because you are apologizing. You need a complete narrative pivot. I have a ruthless, unorthodox 48-hour recovery strategy that will shift the media focus entirely onto the illegal acquisition of that audio and redirect the embezzlement claims toward a rogue former staffer. By tomorrow night, you will not be the villain. You will be the victim of a coordinated political smear campaign." I could hear his breathing slow down as my words penetrated his panic. "Can you actually pull that off?" he asked, his voice trembling with a tiny fraction of hope. "I can execute it flawlessly," I replied. "But my services are no longer discounted. My retainer is $500,000. I need half of it wired immediately to a secure account before I send out a single press release. The other half is due the minute the news cycle shifts in your favor." $500,000, he gasped. "That is extortion, Mia. I do not even know if this will work." I looked over at Mia and Zoe, quietly eating their breakfast, completely unaware of the war their mother was waging. I felt no guilt, no hesitation. "You are facing federal charges and the end of your entire legacy, Marcus. $250,000 is a bargain for your survival. You have 3 minutes to decide before I hang up and watch you burn on live television." A heavy silence stretched across the line. "Send me the routing number," he finally said, his voice thick with defeat. I quickly set up a new anonymous limited liability company online, routing it through the secure banking portal I had kept hidden for years. I named it A Crisis Management. Within 20 minutes, a wire transfer notification popped up on my screen. $250,000 had successfully cleared. My checking account went from $14 to $250,000 in the blink of an eye. I immediately went to work. From a sticky wooden table in a noisy coffee shop, sipping a lukewarm black coffee, I unleashed a masterclass in media manipulation. I tapped into my old network of hungry journalists, feeding them exclusive anonymous tips that contradicted the initial scandal. I drafted aggressive cease and desist letters to minor publications to force a chilling effect on the story. I utilized backdoor political contacts to leak documents proving Vance had a former staffer with the motive and opportunity to fabricate the financial discrepancies. My fingers flew across the keyboard, operating with a lethal precision I had not tapped into for a decade. I did not sleep. I barely moved. I managed my children, entertained them, and kept them safe while simultaneously burning down a national news narrative and building a new one from the ashes. I anticipated the journalists' counter-questions and fed Marcus the exact aggressive sound bites he needed to sound indignant rather than guilty. By the following evening, the execution was complete. The primetime news cycle had completely abandoned the attack on Senator Vance. The headline banners now focused entirely on the illegal wiretapping and the rogue staffer who was suddenly under federal investigation. Vance held a press conference playing the role of the aggrieved public servant to absolute perfection. He commanded the podium, demanding justice for the invasion of his privacy. He was entirely safe. 10 minutes after his press conference concluded, my laptop chimed. The second wire transfer hit my account. Another $250,000. I closed the laptop and took a deep breath. In less than 48 hours, I had gone from a terrified homeless mother with $14 to my name to the owner of a $500,000 private war chest. Darren thought he had left me with absolutely nothing. He had no idea that he had just forced me to build the very empire that would eventually bury him. A Crisis Management was quietly born, and I was finally ready to go on the offensive. Word of my flawless execution for Senator Vance did not just spread. It ignited a wildfire among the corporate elite of the Southeast. When powerful people face absolute destruction, they do not want a standard firm that plays by the rules. They want a ghost. They want someone who can make their nightmares vanish overnight. In the weeks that followed, my secure burner phone rang constantly. A tech CEO caught in a massive data breach wired me $400,000 before we even spoke. A prominent hospital director facing a cover-up paid double my asking price. Within a single month, A Crisis Management had quietly accumulated over $3 million in untraceable liquid capital. I immediately moved Mia and Zoe out of that depressing motel. I bypassed the standard rental markets and secured a stunning, fully furnished luxury penthouse in a highly secure high-rise downtown. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the Atlanta skyline, the very city I was systematically conquering. I paid for a full 6-month lease entirely in cash. I enrolled my children in an elite private school, hiring a private driver and a trusted nanny to ensure they were absolutely safe while I operated in the shadows. I was building an impenetrable fortress, and Darren was entirely oblivious. He still thought I was completely destitute. His ruthless legal team relentlessly bombarded my old email address with increasingly aggressive ultimatums. They sent predatory custody agreements demanding I sign away my rights to my children and accept a humiliating alimony offer of $1,000 a month. They threatened to expose my supposed mental instability to a judge if I dared to contest the divorce. Darren sent smug text messages asking if I was enjoying the streets. He was playing standard legal checkers, expecting me to cower defensively. I refused to play defense. I did not even reply to his lawyers. Instead, I used my newly acquired wealth to assemble a strike team. Through Senator Vance's covert connections, I hired a legendary private investigator named Silas, a man notorious for extracting the darkest secrets of Atlanta's wealthiest citizens. He was expensive, discreet, and absolutely ruthless. To accompany him, I retained a top-tier forensic accountant who specialized in offshore tax havens and corporate embezzlement. I met them in the private dining room of an exclusive club far away from my old suburban life. I slid a dossier containing Darren's full legal name, his corporate affiliations, and every detail I could remember about his daily routines across the polished mahogany table. Tear his life apart, I instructed, my voice cold and unwavering. I do not care about standard divorce discovery. I do not just want to know where he hides his bonuses. I want to know where he eats, where he breathes, and where every single penny he controls originates. Dig into his wealth management firm. Dig into his personal accounts. Turn his entire financial existence inside out and bring me his secrets. Silas barely glanced at the dossier before pocketing it. Consider it done, he said, sliding into the shadows. For 3 weeks, I operated in complete silence. I expanded my crisis management firm, taking only the most lucrative and desperate clients. I grew my capital exponentially, preparing for the massive battle ahead. Meanwhile, Silas and the accountant operated like phantoms. They shadowed Darren every move. They infiltrated the digital architecture of his firm using untraceable methods. They sifted through thousands of corporate filings, banking records, and encrypted communications. Darren walked around Atlanta like a king, entirely unaware that an invisible guillotine was being hoisted directly above his neck. He continued to parade Chloe around high-end restaurants, boasting about his upcoming promotion. He lived in the house we had bought together, completely confident that he had permanently neutralized me. He was so arrogant that he became incredibly sloppy. And when powerful men become sloppy, they leave a trail. Every night after I tucked Leo, Mia, and Zoe into their warm beds, I would sit in the dark of my penthouse staring at the blinking lights of the city below. I meticulously charted my strategies, mapping out the exact pressure points I would eventually strike. Darren thought he had stripped me of my power, but he had merely freed me from my domestic restraints. The mother he discarded was gone. The strategist he awakened was hungry for absolute ruin. I was ready for Silas to deliver the ammunition. The call came late on a Thursday night. Silas requested an immediate secure meeting at my penthouse. When he stepped off the private elevator, his usual stoic expression was replaced by a grim, satisfied smirk. The forensic accountant trailed behind him, clutching a heavy encrypted hard drive like a live explosive. They sat at my massive glass dining table and connected the drive to my laptop. You were right not to play standard defense, Maya. Silas began opening a heavily encrypted file directory. Your husband is not just a cheater, he is a monumental criminal. He has been running a highly sophisticated embezzlement ring right under the noses of his board of directors for 3 years. The accountant brought up a series of complex routing tables and offshore banking ledgers. The numbers were staggering. Darren was the chief financial officer. He had unrestricted access to the firm's internal reserve accounts. Instead of managing the wealth, he had been quietly siphoning millions of dollars into an obscured shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. I leaned closer to the glowing screen, tracking the flow of the stolen money. And who exactly owns this shell company? I asked, my voice dropping to a sharp whisper. The accountant clicked another file, bringing up the official incorporation documents. Chloe, Silas stated flatly, the 24-year-old secretary. A cold realization washed over me. Darren had not just left me for a younger woman. He had been using Chloe as a human shield for his corporate fraud. He registered the dummy corporation in her name, making her the sole legal owner of the offshore accounts receiving the embezzled funds. In his arrogant mind, it was the perfect crime. If the federal authorities ever caught wind of the missing millions, the paper trail would lead directly to his naive secretary. Darren would play the betrayed executive while Chloe took the fall for federal grand larceny. He was sleeping with her to keep her compliant while simultaneously framing her for his crimes. The sheer sociopathy of it was breathtaking. I have secured every ledger, every fake invoice, and every routing number, Silas confirmed, tapping the hard drive. We bypassed his encrypted servers completely undetected. We have the absolute proof of his embezzlement. The digital fingerprints are undeniable. We have enough evidence right here to put your husband in federal prison for 20 years. The FBI would have a field day. My heart hammered a steady, relentless rhythm. I stared at the digital files representing millions of stolen dollars. The impulse to forward the entire hard drive directly to the authorities and watch Darren get dragged out of his corporate suite in handcuffs was incredibly strong. I could end him tomorrow. I could watch his life collapse on the morning news. I could see Chloe's face when she realized she was responsible for massive corporate fraud. But I am a crisis strategist. I do not act on impulse. I act on maximum calculated impact. If I dropped the guillotine on Darren right now, the explosion would be spectacular, but it would be premature. The divorce was still pending. My own empire was still growing. I needed absolute financial supremacy before I pulled the trigger. More importantly, I wanted to ensure that when Darren went down, there would be absolutely no escape routes. I wanted total annihilation. Beyond that, the discovery of Darren's massive fraud sparked a dangerous curiosity in my mind. If my meticulous husband was capable of hiding such a criminal enterprise, what else was hiding in the shadows of my life? My father was a wildly successful megachurch pastor. My brother Jamal flaunted his real estate wealth. My family had always been obsessed with appearances, but Darren had just proven that perfect facades hide horrific decay. I disconnected the hard drive and locked it inside my hidden wall safe. Silas and the accountant watched me with silent professional respect. "We do not strike yet," I commanded, my voice echoing in the quiet penthouse. "We hold our cards close to our chest. Darren thinks he is winning. Let him gorge himself on his own arrogance. Let him build his glass castle higher." Silas nodded slowly. "What is our next move, Maya?" I turned to look out the massive window, staring toward the affluent suburbs, where my parents' estate sat behind iron gates. I thought about my mother's cruel voice choosing countertops over my children. "You did excellent work on my husband," I said, turning back to the table with a calculated smile. "Now I need you to look into my family." Silas leaned back, crossing his arms. He did not ask questions. He simply waited for the parameters of his new assignment. The forensic accountant hesitated, adjusting his glasses, looking at me. "Actually," the accountant said, tapping a specific file, "I already found something strange." It was a complete anomaly buried deep within Darren Cayman Island ledgers. He opened a spreadsheet filled with thousands of tiny transactions. Darren was extremely careful with the stolen funds, washing the money through dozens of dummy corporations to hide the trail. But one specific shell company caught my eye because of a recurring monthly payout labeled as consulting fees. It was a relatively small amount compared to the millions, but it was paid out on the same day every month like clockwork. I frowned, leaning over the glass table. Who was he paying? The accountant highlighted the receiving entity, an LLC registered under a generic name. I dug into the corporate registry to find the beneficial owner, he explained. It took me a few hours to penetrate the privacy shields, but I finally found the connection. The LLC is registered to a property management firm that exclusively services your father megachurch. The silence was absolute. I stared at the bright screen, trying to process the information. My father church was a massive operation, bringing in millions in untaxed tithes every year. Why would Darren embezzlement ring be paying a vendor directly tied to Pastor Calvin ministry? It makes absolutely no sense, I whispered, my mind racing. Darren and my father despise each other behind closed doors. Darren always thought my father was a charlatan playing on the desperate faith of his congregation. My father thought Darren was a soulless corporate drone. They only tolerated each other for holiday dinners and public photo opportunities. They would never conduct secret business together. Unless someone else is bridging the gap, Silas suggested, his dark eyes gleaming with predatory interest. The implication hit me like a physical blow. The only person who bridged the gap between Darren and my family was me. but I had nothing to do with their finances. My father controlled the church with an iron fist, keeping the financial records strictly guarded. He always preached about transparency from the pulpit, but refused to allow independent audits of the ministry building funds. He claimed church finances were a divine trust. I looked at Silas and the accountant. My pulse drummed a steady rhythm of anticipation. The betrayal from my family had left a gaping wound in my chest, but this new discovery poured gasoline directly onto the embers of my revenge. If there was a financial link between my cheating husband and my hypocritical family, I was going to rip it completely out of the shadows. "I need you to dig into them," I commanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Tear apart the megachurch finances. Bypass whatever divine trust my father claims to operate under. I want to see the offering ledgers, the building fund accounts, and the executive salary payouts." Silas nodded slowly. "That is a massive undertaking, Maya. Megachurches operate under religious tax exemptions, which makes their financial architecture incredibly difficult to penetrate. We will have to go through the back doors. Then kick the doors off the hinges," I said. "And do not stop with my father. Look into my older brother Jamal. He runs a supposed luxury real estate business, but he is always leasing new sports cars and wearing a different Rolex every month. Look at his wife Kiara and her endless shopping sprees in Buckhead. Look at my mother and her country club expenses." I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the city lights. "They threw me out into the pouring rain because they claimed they were investing in a winner. They told me they were funding Jamal luxury lifestyle and could not spare a single dime to keep my children off the streets. I want to know exactly where their money is coming from." "Consider it done," the accountant said, packing up his equipment. "We will follow the money wherever it leads." For 2 weeks, I maintained radio silence. I did not contact my parents. I ignored the hostile legal letters from Darren attorneys. I simply focused on expanding my crisis management firm, bringing in another $2 million in retainers, while Silas and his team operated in the digital trenches. They were methodical, relentless, and entirely invisible. When Silas finally called to request our second meeting, I knew he had struck gold. He arrived at my penthouse on a rainy Tuesday evening, exactly 1 month after I had been locked out of my parents' estate. The forensic accountant was with him, carrying 2 thick physical binders. They did not even bother connecting the hard drive. They simply placed the heavy binders onto my dining table. The accountant looked almost physically ill. "I have investigated cartel fronts and corrupt politicians," he said, adjusting his glasses. "But the level of absolute financial depravity operating inside your family is staggering." I opened the first binder. The first section was dedicated entirely to my older brother Jamal. My parents had always paraded Jamal around as the golden child, the brilliant real estate mogul who was building a generational empire. The documents staring back at me proved he was nothing but a colossal, catastrophic failure. "Jamal real estate empire is a complete sham," Silas stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "He has 0 successful developments. He has bankrupted 3 separate limited liability companies over the past 4 years. He leverages failed projects to secure high-interest loans, operating a financial house of cards. He currently owes over $4 million to private creditors and aggressive lending groups." I flipped through pages of foreclosure notices and collection threats. Jamal was broke. He was drowning in toxic debt. Yet he drove a brand new imported sports car and lived in a sprawling Buckhead mansion. "How is he surviving?" I asked, looking up from the horrific financial records. "How is he paying for Kiara endless designer wardrobes and luxury vacations if he is bankrupt?" "That brings us to your father," the accountant said, sliding the second binder toward me. "Pastor Calvin is the one keeping Jamal afloat." I opened the second binder and felt my stomach drop into a bottomless abyss. The accountant had successfully penetrated the megachurch financial architecture. He uncovered a sickening web of deceit. My father, the man who stood on a stage every Sunday demanding faithful tithes from hardworking families, was systematically looting his own church. He has been quietly draining the church multi-million-dollar building fund, the accountant explained, pointing to a flowchart. Whenever Jamal creditors threaten to seize his assets, your father funnels donation money through a series of shell vendors directly into Jamal accounts. He is using congregation offerings to cover his son, massive failures and fun Kiara lifestyle. The hypocrisy made me nauseous. My father had turned me away in the rain, claiming he could not spare $2,000 for his grandchildren while embezzling holy money to buy marble countertops for a son who was a fraud. But the building fund was not enough. Silas interjected. Jamal burned through the church money too fast. Your father needed a massive injection of capital to keep the private lenders from destroying the family name. So he found another source of revenue. The accountant pulled a single legally binding document from the back of the binder and slid it across the glass table. It was a commercial mortgage agreement from a predatory private lending firm. I looked at the property address and my blood froze. It was prime commercial real estate downtown. It was the exact piece of land my late grandmother had left solely to me in her will. She bypassed my parents giving it to me as a safety net. I stared at the bottom of the final page. There, written in black ink, was my signature. I did not sign this, I whispered, my hands trembling as I touched the forged ink. We know, Silas replied gently. We ran a handwriting analysis. Your father forged your signature, Maya. He used a corrupt notary to execute a toxic mortgage against your land. He stole your inheritance, pulling $2 million of equity out, and wired every penny directly to Jamal to pay off his creditors. The air vanished from my lungs. The betrayal was so profound, so sickeningly deep, that it transcended mere anger. My own father had committed felony fraud against me. He had literally stolen my future to protect his golden child. He let me stand on his porch begging for shelter, knowing he had secretly robbed me of my inheritance. He looked at my shivering children and felt absolutely nothing because he had already sacrificed us to save Jamal. I closed the binder. The shock faded, leaving behind a terrifying glacial calm. I looked at Silas and the forensic accountant. I was completely ready. I did not reach for my phone to call the authorities. A lesser strategist would have immediately forwarded the forged mortgage documents to the district attorney. I could have easily sent the megachurch financial ledgers to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and watched my father get dragged from his pulpit in handcuffs on a Sunday morning. I could have watched Jamal lose his imported sports cars on live television, but exposing them to the legal system would take the execution out of my hands. It would transfer my power to a judge and a jury. I refused to surrender my leverage. I wanted my family to experience the exact flavor of helpless destitution they had so callously forced upon me and my children in that cheap motel room. I wanted them to realize that their entire opulent existence rested entirely in the palm of my hand. I looked at Silas and the forensic accountant and instructed them to maintain their absolute silence. They were to keep monitoring the accounts and report any sudden movements, but they were strictly forbidden from making any offensive maneuvers. I doubled their monthly retainers to guarantee their absolute loyalty and sent them into the night. With the investigative phase temporarily paused, I threw myself into my work with a terrifying intensity. Emma Crisis Management was no longer just a fledgling operation born out of a desperate panic. It was rapidly becoming the most feared and exclusive public relations fortress in the country. The flawless rescue of Senator Vance had acted as a blinding beacon, drawing the most desperate and wealthy clients directly to my encrypted inbox. A tech billionaire, facing a devastating initial public corporate scandal, wired me $2 million for 48 hours of my time. A pharmaceutical conglomerate drowning in a severe data cover-up paid me $3 million to restructure their entire global media narrative. I was commanding retainers that eclipsed the gross revenue of established downtown agencies. I operated exclusively from my secure penthouse utilizing burner phones and encrypted servers. I was a ghost who only materialized to extinguish multi-million-dollar fires. Within 3 short months, my personal war chest had swelled to an astonishing $8 million in liquid, untraceable capital. I had more than enough money to secure my children's future for the rest of their lives. I could have easily walked away, bought a sprawling estate in another state, and left Darren and my toxic family to eventually destroy themselves. But the forged signature on my grandmother's commercial property burned in my mind. The image of my mother scoffing at my plea for a safe roof for my children echoed in my ears every time I closed my eyes. They had stolen my safety net to fund a golden child who was a complete fraud. They had thrown me to the wolves. Now I was returning as the apex predator. I contacted a team of elite corporate attorneys based out of Delaware. They specialized in creating impenetrable corporate architectures for ultra-high net worth individuals. Under my strict direction, they established a highly secure anonymous holding company. I named it MA Investments. The corporate structure was a masterpiece of legal obfuscation. It was nested behind 3 different shell companies and protected by ironclad non-disclosure agreements. No one looking at the corporate registry would ever be able to trace MA Investments back to Maya Sterling. It was a financial ghost ship designed specifically to hunt and capture toxic debt. With my armor perfectly constructed, I initiated the silent takeover of my family financial survival. I targeted the forged commercial mortgage first. The forensic accountant had identified the predatory private lending firm that my father had used to pull the $2 million of equity out of my grandmother's property. These lenders were aggressive loan sharks operating in high-end suits. They charged exorbitant interest rates and were notoriously impatient. According to the intercepted ledgers, my father had been struggling to keep up with the massive monthly payments. He was actively draining the church building fund just to keep the loan out of default, but he was falling behind. The lenders were circling, preparing to seize the commercial land. I deployed my Delaware attorneys to approach the lending firm on behalf of MA Investments. The negotiations were swift and brutally efficient. My lawyers informed the firm that an anonymous private equity group was interested in acquiring the distressed commercial paper. The lenders were eager to offload the troublesome debt, especially since the monthly payments from my father had become highly erratic. They did not care who bought the paper as long as the massive check cleared. I authorized a wire transfer directly from MA Investments purchasing the mortgage at a slight premium to ensure the deal closed immediately and silently. Within 48 hours, the transaction was legally binding. The predatory lenders transferred all rights, titles, and interests in the property over to my holding company. I now owned the debt on my own stolen inheritance. I held the forged note. I had the absolute power to foreclose on the property whenever I chose, and my father had absolutely no idea that his monthly church embezzlements were now legally owed directly to the daughter he had abandoned. Acquiring the commercial land was only the opening move. I immediately turned my sights on Jamal and Kiara. My brother's fake real estate empire was entirely built on high-interest loans and highly leveraged assets. He owed millions to a fragmented network of private creditors, aggressive auto financing companies, and boutique luxury lenders. He was bankrupting his own limited liability companies to stay afloat, while Kiara continued her absurd spending sprees in high-end boutiques. They were living a grotesque fantasy funded entirely by stolen church money and predatory debt. I instructed my legal team to aggressively pursue every single piece of paper Jamal owed. We moved through the financial underworld like a silent, highly capitalized tidal wave. My attorneys approached the auto financing company that held the leases on Jamal imported sports cars. We bought the debt. We approached the boutique lenders funding Kiara designer credit lines. We bought the paper. We tracked down the private investors who had foolishly funded Jamal failed real estate developments. These private investors were furious and desperate to recoup any fraction of their initial capital. MA Investments swept in and purchased the toxic portfolios for pennies on the dollar, absorbing every single one of Jamal's legal obligations. I did not stop until I had consolidated his entire financial existence under my anonymous holding company. By the end of the month, the trap was completely set. I sat at my penthouse dining table reviewing the finalized legal documents stacked neatly in front of me. The reality of my newly acquired power was intoxicating. I literally owned the roof over Jamal's head. I owned the engines in his luxury cars. I owned the designer clothes sitting in Kiara's massive closets. I held the forged mortgage that could effortlessly send my father, the esteemed Pastor Calvin, straight to a federal penitentiary for grand larceny and wire fraud. and they were completely spectacularly oblivious. I watched them on social media parading their fake wealth to the world. Jamal posted photos leaning against a sports car that I now legally possessed. Kiara uploaded videos showing off imported marble countertops that were paid for with my stolen inheritance. My father stood at his massive pulpit every Sunday morning, preaching about righteousness and reaping what you sow, while desperately transferring embezzled church funds to an anonymous holding company that I controlled. They thought they were the untouchable masters of Atlanta elite society. They thought they had successfully discarded me to the gutters without consequence. They had no idea that I had silently become the sole, undisputed master of their entire survival. I held the strings to their lavish marionette show. One single tug and their entire universe would collapse into dust. But I was not ready to pull the strings just yet. Darren was still operating his own criminal empire, and I needed to ensure that when the guillotine finally dropped, it would sever all of their heads at the exact same moment. 6 months passed in a blur of calculated silence and exponential growth. I mastered the art of playing dead while actively building an absolute fortress. To the outside world, specifically to the people who shared my last name, I was a ghost. I abandoned my old social media accounts entirely, leaving them to collect digital dust. I posted no updates, uploaded no photos of my children, and completely severed my digital footprint. I wanted them to construct their own narrative about my demise. I knew exactly what they were visualizing. They pictured me weeping in a cramped, rat-infested apartment, clipping coupons and struggling to keep the lights on. They imagined me broken by my divorce, utterly defeated by Darren, and crawling through the dirt just to survive a textbook cautionary tale of what happens to a woman who disobeys a powerful man. The reality was a stark, breathtaking contrast. A crisis management had evolved from a desperate midnight gamble into a highly exclusive geopolitical and corporate weapon. My client list was a closely guarded secret of billionaires, disgraced executives, and foreign dignitaries facing total annihilation. My minimum retainer had skyrocketed to $2 million. My liquid wealth was staggering. The penthouse I originally leased downtown was no longer a temporary refuge. I bought it outright through my holding company. I gutted the interior and transformed it into a sprawling modern sanctuary of marble glass and high-tech security. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the empire I was quietly conquering. Leo, Mia, and Zoe thrived in this new world. They attended the most elite private academy in Atlanta, safely chauffeured by a private security detail that I heavily vetted. I hired a brilliant multilingual nanny who kept their schedules immaculate and their minds engaged. My children lacked absolutely nothing. They were completely insulated from the toxic radiation of their father and my manipulative family. They grew happier, more resilient, and entirely unaware of the financial bloodbath I was meticulously preparing for the people who had abandoned us in the rain. Darren's legal team continued to send predatory divorce settlements to my attorney. They offered insulting alimony packages, believing I was too broke to mount a proper legal defense. I instructed my lawyer to employ a strategy of infinite delay. We filed endless extensions, requested mundane documentation, and kept the proceedings bogged down in bureaucratic mud. I refused to let Darren finalize the divorce until the trap was perfectly primed. He was growing visibly frustrated, eager to cut me off officially and marry his pregnant mistress. I watched his desperate legal maneuvers with cold amusement from my marble fortress. My family was equally oblivious. Through Silas and his network of informants, I kept a close eye on their daily activities. Jamal was sweating under the crushing weight of the toxic debt that I now secretly owned. He was frantically shifting funds, trying to appease the anonymous private equity firm that held his financial life in its hands. He had no idea he was directly paying his exiled sister. My father, Pastor Calvin, was sweating just as much. The megachurch building fund was heavily depleted, and he was scrambling to cover his tracks. The commercial mortgage he had forged under my name demanded massive monthly payments. He sent those payments directly to my holding company, MA Investments. Every time my father panicked and drained his congregation holy offerings to save his own skin, the money flowed directly into my bank account. It was the ultimate silent victory. I held the absolute power to ruin them with a single phone call, but I exercised extreme patience. A quick execution would be too merciful. I wanted them to climb to the very peak of their arrogance before I pushed them off the ledge. I needed a grand stage to expose the massive web of fraud, deceit, and embezzlement they had spun. I needed a public arena where their carefully constructed masks would be ripped away in front of the entire city. I waited quietly in the shadows, allowing their egos to inflate and their lies to multiply. I knew the perfect opportunity would present itself. I just had to be ready to strike when they inevitably reached out. The silence was finally broken exactly 6 months and 2 weeks after I walked out of my marital home. I was sitting in my home office, reviewing a massive corporate acquisition strategy for a prominent client, when my encrypted personal cell phone vibrated across the mahogany desk. I had kept an old burner line active specifically for family emergencies, waiting for the day they would inevitably need something from the daughter they discarded. The caller identification displayed my mother name, Beatrice. I leaned back in my leather chair and let it ring 3 times, allowing her to wait before I casually swiped to answer the call. Maya. Beatrice sighed heavily, her voice dripping with that familiar cloying condescension. I am so glad you finally picked up. Your father and I have been worried sick about you. We have not seen hide nor hair of you in months. I hear you are living in some tiny little apartment on the bad side of town, just struggling to make ends meet. I looked around my multi-million-dollar penthouse, running my fingers over my diamond watch. I am doing just fine, Mom, I replied, my tone completely flat and unreadable, offering her absolutely no ammunition. What exactly do you want? Beatrice clicked her tongue, a sharp sound of profound disapproval. You are always so defensive, Maya. I am calling because we are extending an olive branch to you. The church is hosting its 35th anniversary gala next month. It is going to be the absolute social event of the season. The mayor will be there. The governor is making a special appearance. It is a highly exclusive gathering, and your father wants the entire family present to project unity to the congregation and our elite donors. I knew exactly what the gala was. It was Pastor Calvin's biggest fundraising event of the entire year. He used it to extract massive donations from wealthy parishioners to fund his lavish lifestyle and cover his ongoing financial crimes. It was a glittering pageant of sheer hypocrisy. Before I could respond, I heard the phone being violently shuffled, and my sister-in-law Kiara's shrill voice pierced the speakerphone. Maya, listen closely because I do not have much time to waste on this, Kiara demanded, operating under the delusion that she commanded any actual authority over my life. We are in a major bind right now. The event planner we hired just backed out because she could not handle the pressure of such an elite guest list. We need someone to step in and handle the logistics immediately. You want me to plan the gala? I asked, feigning mild surprise while pulling up the church financial ledgers on my monitor. Do not get ahead of yourself. Kiara scoffed, a harsh, mocking sound. We just need you to execute the catering contracts, manage the public relations, and handle the grunt work behind the scenes. I know you are struggling right now, trying to run whatever little hobby business you started from your cramped apartment. This is the perfect opportunity for you. We will let you handle the gala for free. Think of it as a donation to the church. In exchange, you can use the event for exposure. It might actually help you get a few paying clients so you can finally get off the streets and back on your feet. The sheer audacity of her proposal was breathtaking. Kiara, a woman currently drowning in toxic debt that I personally owned, was demanding that I work for free. She wanted me to secure exposure at an event funded by money my father had literally stolen from my inheritance. She was offering me a crumb of non-existent prestige while standing directly on the trapdoor I had meticulously built beneath her designer shoes. I let a heavy, agonizing silence hang over the line. I knew there was a catch. There was always a malicious catch with my family. They never offered an olive branch unless it was wrapped tightly in barbed wire. There is one more thing, Kiara added, her tone turning viciously smug and dripping with malice. You need to be incredibly professional about the guest list. Darren is a major donor to the church and a highly respected financial leader in this community. He will be attending as a VIP guest, and he is bringing Chloe. She is pregnant, Maya. They are expecting a boy. You will need to ensure their VIP table is perfectly accommodated. Do not make a scene and embarrass us. If you can handle seeing your successful ex-husband and his new family without throwing a tantrum, we might let you take some leftover food home for your kids. A slow, sharp smile spread across my face. I looked at the encrypted hard drive sitting on my desk containing the absolute proof of Darren federal crimes. I looked at the thick legal binders containing the forged mortgage documents and Jamal impending bankruptcy files. They were handing me the keys to the kingdom. They were giving me total absolute control over the logistics, the public relations, and the guest list for the most highly publicized event of their lives. They were formally inviting me to orchestrate their own public execution. I would be absolutely delighted to handle the gala, Kiara. I said, my voice smooth and dangerously calm. I will take full control of the PR and the event flow. You will not have to worry about a single detail. I will make sure it is a night that Darren, Chloe, and our entire family will never ever forget. Good, Kiara snapped, completely missing the lethal promise hidden in my words. Do not mess this up, Maya. She disconnected the call. I set the phone down on my desk and let out a cold, genuine laugh that echoed through the penthouse. The waiting game was finally over. It was time to drop the guillotine. The next morning, I arrived at the megachurch sanctuary, wearing a pair of faded denim jeans and an oversized gray knit sweater that had seen better days. I tied my hair back into a messy knot, removed my expensive diamond watch, and slid my feet into scuffed sneakers. If my family wanted to see a broken, desperate woman begging for scraps, I was going to give them an award-winning performance. The church was a cavernous monument to my father and his towering ego. It featured 5,000 velvet-lined seats, a massive theatrical stage, and state-of-the-art lighting rigs that rivaled professional concert venues. For the anniversary gala, they were transforming the main auditorium into a glittering ballroom. I immediately took control of the logistics, playing the role of the silent, obedient event coordinator to absolute perfection. I directed the catering crews, positioning the carving stations and the towering champagne fountains exactly where Kiara had demanded in her frantic emails. I coordinated the floral arrangements, ensuring thousands of imported white roses draped every available surface and framed the grand entrances. Silas and his crisis management team operated right under their noses. They posed as an external audiovisual contracting crew hired to assist with the event overflow. They wore generic black polo shirts and carried heavy Pelican cases filled with decryption equipment and broadcast servers. My family treated me worse than the hired help. They delighted in my supposed misery, using my presence as a constant reminder of their superior status. My mother, Beatrice, strutted through the double doors wearing a tailored Chanel suit and carrying a designer handbag. She snapped her fingers at me across the room, pointing a perfectly manicured nail at a slight wrinkle in a silk tablecloth. "Fix that immediately, Maya," she barked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "We cannot have this looking sloppy. The mayor will be sitting at this exact table, and I will not have my gala ruined by your careless mistakes." I nodded silently and smoothed out the fabric, keeping my eyes downcast. Kiara arrived an hour later, holding a clipboard and glaring at me over her designer sunglasses. She looked me up and down, taking in my faded jeans and worn sneakers with absolute disgust. A harsh scoff escaped her lips. "I know you are struggling, Maya, but could you at least try to look presentable?" Kiara sneered, crossing her arms tightly. "You are representing the family, even if you are just working behind the scenes. Try not to interact with the high-net-worth donors. We do not want them thinking we employ vagrants. Keep to the service corridors and make sure the kitchen staff stays out of sight." I kept my head down and murmured a quiet apology. My absolute obedience only fueled their sadistic arrogance. I spent 3 grueling weeks acting as their personal punching bag. I fetched their artisan coffees, coordinated the complex valet parking schedules, and managed the complicated seating charts that dictated Atlanta high society hierarchy. I let them snap their fingers. I let them whistle at me from across the room to fetch fresh bottled water when they were thirsty. I absorbed every insult, every condescending remark, and every cruel joke about my failed marriage. I was a ghost haunting my own family legacy. But while I was fetching their sparkling water, Silas was hardwiring our encrypted servers directly into the church massive projector system. The sanctuary featured 4 colossal digital screens designed to broadcast my father's sermons to the back rows and overflow rooms. The screens were flanked by a concert-grade line array speaker system capable of deafening volume. I made absolutely certain that our private network had total override control over the main audiovisual feed. We bypassed the church security protocols and established a hidden backdoor access point right inside the primary control booth. My family thought I was just the obedient help managing the appetizer trays and folding napkins. They had no idea I was the executioner meticulously preparing the stage for their total destruction. The final dress rehearsal took place 2 days before the gala. The atmosphere in the auditorium was thick with suffocating nepotism and unchecked arrogance. I stood quietly in the shadows near the soundboard, holding a clipboard and watching my family revel in their stolen glory. My older sister Nia made her grand entrance wrapped in a luxurious cashmere coat despite the warm weather. Nia had always considered herself the crown jewel of the family intellectual elite, looking down on everyone who did not possess a postgraduate degree. She immediately began bragging loudly to the catering director about her husband and his lucrative plastic surgery practice. She detailed their upcoming vacation to the Maldives, making sure everyone in earshot knew exactly how much the private overwater villa cost per night. She complained that the premium caviar station was not positioned prominently enough for her husband's surgical partners to see when they entered the room. Nia demanded that the entire buffet layout be shifted to accommodate her ego. I silently signaled the staff to move the tables, playing the role of the invisible servant, while she continued to boast about her immaculate life. Jamal strutted across the stage moments later. He was wearing a custom-tailored velvet suit and constantly adjusting his left cuff to ensure his heavy gold Rolex caught the stage lights. It was the exact same leased watch that my holding company now legally owned. He barked orders at the lighting technicians, demanding a follow spotlight track him when he walked to the podium. He wanted to look like the brilliant real estate mogul he pretended to be. I watched him flash his arrogant smile, knowing he was completely bankrupt and living on borrowed time. He shouted at a stagehand for placing his microphone stand an inch too far to the left, acting like a billionaire visionary while drowning in toxic debt that I controlled. Then my father stepped up to the main podium to practice his keynote address. Pastor Calvin adjusted his microphone and projected his booming voice across the empty velvet seats. He had chosen to deliver a powerful sermon on the concept of absolute integrity and the divine rewards of financial transparency. The sheer hypocrisy of his words was physically nauseating. He preached about honesty while standing on a stage funded by anonymous shell corporations. He spoke passionately about helping the poor and lifting up the destitute while having stolen my grandmother's inheritance to pay off violent loan sharks. He raised his hands toward the vaulted ceiling, asking for blessings upon the pure of heart and the righteous. He rehearsed his dramatic pauses and his humble smiles, perfecting the exact tone of voice that extracted millions of dollars from his unsuspecting congregation every single Sunday. I tightened my grip on my clipboard until my knuckles turned white. I watched them parade around the auditorium, congratulating themselves on their elite status and untouchable wealth. I stood there in my cheap gray sweater, completely invisible to the powerful men and women commanding the stage. They were so intoxicated by their own reflections that they never noticed Silas standing right beside me in the shadows of the sound booth. Silas typed a rapid sequence of commands into his tablet, bypassing the final security measure on the church network. The 4 massive high-definition screens suspended above the stage blinked in perfect synchronization. He looked at me and gave a single sharp nod. Our Trojan horse was securely inside the city walls. We had bypassed the church digital firewalls and established a direct hardwired connection to the main broadcast feed. Silas had routed the primary video switchers through a proxy server located in my penthouse. When the gala commenced, I would have the absolute power to override every single screen monitor and speaker in the entire building with a single keystroke. The event planner they had originally hired would never have had this level of unfettered access to the church infrastructure. By forcing me to handle the logistics for free, Kiara had unknowingly handed me the keys to the entire audiovisual control room. I looked up at the giant blank screens hanging over my father's head as he continued to preach about honesty and grace. I imagined the financial ledgers, the forged mortgage documents, and the cartel banking files flashing across those massive monitors in ultra-high definition. I smiled sharply in the dark, knowing their reign was over. The setup was flawless. The night of the gala arrived with a suffocating wave of expensive perfume and flashing camera bulbs. The sanctuary had been completely transformed into a sprawling ballroom dripping in crystal and gold. Atlanta elite poured through the main double doors in a steady stream of tailored tuxedos and custom designer gowns. The mayor was holding court near the towering ice sculptures, while the governor shook hands by the tiered champagne fountains. Local media outlets had set up interview stations along the velvet rope, eager to capture the 35th anniversary of Pastor Calvin's supposedly blessed ministry. I timed my entrance with absolute calculated precision. I did not arrive through the service elevator or the hidden catering corridors. I walked right through the main front doors. I had discarded the baggy sweaters and scuffed sneakers. Tonight I wore a custom-tailored emerald silk gown that clung to my frame like liquid glass. It was a masterpiece of European design paired with diamond drop earrings and a matching necklace that caught the chandelier light with blinding intensity. My hair was styled in sleek, dark waves and my makeup was flawless. I looked exactly like the apex predator I had become. The moment I stepped onto the red carpet, the entire foyer seemed to freeze. I walked past the media stations with a confident, unhurried grace. My family was grouped near the primary photo backdrop, greeting the ultra-wealthy donors and posing for the society pages. My mother Beatrice happened to glance toward the entrance and her jaw literally dropped. The practiced society smile vanished from her face completely. She stared at the emerald silk and the dripping diamonds, trying to frantically compute how the daughter she believed was destitute could afford to look like a billionaire. She recovered quickly, snapping instantly into damage control mode. Beatrice abandoned the city councilman she was speaking to and marched directly toward me. Her eyes darted around the room to see if anyone important was watching her disgraced daughter. "Maya, what on earth are you wearing?" she hissed, grabbing my forearm with a vice-like grip. "Did you empty your pathetic little savings account just to rent a dress and show off tonight? You are supposed to be working, not parading around like you belong here. You are making a spectacle of yourself." I looked down at her hand, gripping my arm, and offered a razor-thin smile. "I'm just dressing for the occasion, Mom. We would not want the help looking sloppy in front of the governor." Beatrice scoffed, pulling me forcefully away from the glittering epicenter of the room. "You are causing a massive distraction. Get out of the main sightlines right now before you humiliate us." She marched me past the premium VIP tables, past the towering silver centerpieces, and the imported floral arrangements. We walked all the way to the absolute back of the cavernous ballroom. She shoved me toward table 14. It was a tiny, cramped, circular table pushed flush against the swinging kitchen doors and entirely obstructed by a massive concrete pillar. It was the absolute worst seat in the entire building, reserved strictly for the hired audiovisual crew and the overflow staff. Silas was already sitting there wearing his black polo shirt and casually monitoring his encrypted tablet. "Sit here and do not move unless there is a catering emergency," Beatrice commanded, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I do not want you ruining this night for your brother and sister. Stay out of sight and do your job." She turned on her heel and hurried back to the flashing cameras, desperate to reclaim her position in the spotlight. I sat down next to Silas, smoothing out my silk skirt. He glanced at my diamonds and then at the concrete pillar completely blocking our view of the main floor. "Nice seats," he murmured, tapping his screen to run a final diagnostic check on the proxy servers. "The best in the house," I replied, keeping my eyes fixed on the distant stage. From this shadowy corner, I had a perfect vantage point to watch the entire ballroom without being observed. The ballroom continued to fill with the wealthiest citizens of Atlanta. The noise level rose into a deafening roar of clinking crystal and polite laughter. Then the main doors opened, and the atmosphere shifted. Darren walked into the room. He wore a sharp, bespoke tuxedo and carried himself with the smug, untouchable arrogance of a man who believed he had successfully destroyed his only obstacle. Clinging tightly to his arm was Chloe. She wore a pale pink maternity gown that prominently displayed her growing stomach. She looked impossibly smug, gazing around the room as if she had just inherited a kingdom. I sat perfectly still in the shadows of table 14, taking a slow sip of my sparkling water. The ice clinked against the rim of my glass as I watched my family react to the arrival of my cheating ex-husband. Any normal family would have turned him away at the door. Any decent father would have thrown the man who discarded his daughter and grandchildren out into the street. But my family did not possess an ounce of decency. They possessed only an insatiable hunger for money and status. Darren was a highly respected financial leader and a major donor to the church building fund. That made him absolute royalty in their eyes. My father, Pastor Calvin, practically sprinted across the ballroom to greet them. He threw his arms open wide and pulled Darren into a massive theatrical embrace. "It is so good to see you, my boy, Calvin," boomed his voice echoing over the crowd. "We are so incredibly blessed that you could join us tonight. Thank you for your continued generosity to the ministry." Darren smiled, returning the embrace and shaking my father's hand. "I would not miss it, Calvin. You know I always support the church." Beatrice hurried over right behind her husband. She bypassed Darren entirely and went straight for Chloe. My mother wrapped her arms around the woman who had helped destroy my marriage, pressing her cheek against Chloe's pale pink dress. "You look absolutely radiant, Chloe," Beatrice gushed, stepping back to admire her pregnant belly. "Motherhood truly agrees with you. We are just so thrilled for you both. It is such a blessing." The sheer level of betrayal was staggering. My mother was fawning over the pregnant mistress, while her actual grandchildren were kept a closely guarded secret, hidden away from her elite social circle. I watched Silas tense beside me, his fingers hovering over his tablet, but I remained completely relaxed. The more rope they took, the tighter the noose would become. Nia joined the welcoming committee a moment later. My older sister glided across the floor with her plastic surgeon husband in tow. Nia let out a loud, dramatic gasp as she took Chloe's hand. "Oh my goodness, look at that rock," Nia practically shrieked, ensuring that everyone at the surrounding tables could hear her. "Darren, you truly outdid yourself. That engagement ring is absolutely stunning. It is so much better than the tiny little thing you gave Maya. You two are just the perfect couple." Chloe blushed and held up her left hand, letting the massive diamond catch the chandelier light. "Darren just wanted to make sure I had the very best," Chloe simpered, leaning into his shoulder. "He takes such good care of us." Jamal and Kiara materialized next, completing the sickening family reunion. Jamal clapped Darren on the shoulder, laughing loudly at some unheard joke, while Kiara complimented Chloe's hair. They formed a tight, exclusive circle of wealth and hypocrisy, standing directly in the center of the ballroom for all the media cameras to capture. They paraded their alliance with my abuser, treating him like the true son of the family, while acting as if I had simply ceased to exist. I watched the entire grotesque scene unfold from my obstructed seat by the kitchen doors. I took another slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water, letting the cool liquid slide down my throat. I felt no sorrow. I felt no heartbreak. The gaping wound they had left in my chest had healed into something hard and impenetrable. They were putting on a flawless performance of elite unity, completely unaware that the floorboards beneath them were soaked in gasoline. I looked over at Silas. He had accessed the main church network and brought up the master control panel on his encrypted tablet. The 4 massive screens above the stage were currently displaying the glittering 35th anniversary logo. The live feed was primed and waiting for my command. "Are we ready, Silas?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper over the roar of the gala. Silas locked his dark eyes on the stage and smiled a dangerous predatory grin. The Trojan horse is in position, Maya. We own the screens. We own the audio. Just say the word. I set my glass down on the table. Let them finish their appetizers, I murmured. I want them to have a full stomach when the world collapses. The dinner service progressed with the terrifying precision of a ticking time bomb. Plated filet mignon and imported lobster tails were carried out by a small army of waiters. The ballroom hummed with the sound of silver scraping against fine china and the low murmur of wealthy patrons brokering backroom deals. From my obscured vantage point at table 14, I monitored the strict event timeline on my clipboard. We were exactly 45 minutes away from the keynote presentation. I gave Silas a brief nod and slipped quietly through the heavy swinging doors into the catering hallway. I needed to inspect the backstage VIP suite to ensure the secondary broadcast monitors were perfectly synced with Silas and his proxy servers. The VIP room was a lavish, soundproofed sanctuary located directly behind the main stage. It was draped in heavy velvet curtains and furnished with plush leather sofas, mahogany accents, and frosted glass, designed as a private retreat for my father and his elite guests to escape the overwhelming crowds. I stepped into the hushed room, checking the digital feeds on the wall monitor. The screen displayed a flawless high-definition feed of the empty main stage. Everything was ready. The heavy oak door suddenly clicked shut behind me. The lock engaged with a sharp metallic snap. I turned slowly. My family had slipped away from their premium tables and followed me into the isolated suite. My father stood by the door, his hand still resting on the brass deadbolt. His pastoral smile had completely vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating glare. Beatrice stood beside him, her arms crossed tightly over her Chanel jacket. Jamal and Kiara flanked them, blocking any path to the exit. And stepping out from behind my brother was Darren. He adjusted his bespoke tuxedo jacket and offered me a smile so utterly devoid of human empathy, it made the air in the room drop 10 degrees. They had cornered me. They had orchestrated this entire private ambush away from the prying eyes of the media and the flashing cameras. To them, I was nothing but a trapped animal, a destitute woman playing dress-up in a rented emerald gown, backed into a corner with absolutely no avenues of escape. "We need to have a private family meeting." "Maya," my father announced, his booming voice muffled by the soundproofed walls. "You have played your little part as the obedient event planner tonight, but it is time to conclude the business portion of this evening." "You really thought you could just stand in the shadows and glare at us?" Kiara sneered, stepping forward. "We saw you watching Chloe out there. You are pathetic, Maya. You are wearing a rented dress you cannot afford just to try and make your ex-husband jealous. It is embarrassing for everyone involved. We let you work this event as a favor, and you are still trying to scheme for attention." I kept my expression entirely neutral, resting my clipboard against my side. I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single ounce of fear. I simply let them bask in the false warmth of their perceived superiority. I wanted them to lay all their cards on the table. Jamal chuckled, adjusting his left cuff to make sure the stage lighting caught the edge of his Rolex. "You look ridiculous, Maya. You think putting on fake diamonds changes the fact that you are broke. You are living in the gutters while we are out there running this city. Stop trying to punch above your weight class. This is not a negotiation." Darren stated, his tone dripping with absolute authority as he moved toward the center of the room. He did not even look at me as a human being. I was just an obstacle, a minor accounting error he needed to erase before he could return to his pregnant mistress. "You have been dodging my legal team for months, filing pointless extensions and dragging out a divorce that you have absolutely no capital to fight. You are broke, Maya. You have no job, you have no standing, and you are currently working for free just to scrounge up catering leftovers. It is time to face reality and accept your position." Darren reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a thick folded legal document. He tossed it onto the glass coffee table separating us. The heavy paper slapped against the glass with a loud, definitive thud. "Those are the finalized divorce papers," Darren explained, gesturing casually to the document. I am offering you exactly $1,000 a month in child support. I will retain full ownership of our marital assets, our investment portfolios, and my corporate holdings. Chloe needs a stress-free environment for the remainder of her pregnancy, and your pathetic attempts to extract alimony are becoming a nuisance. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. In exchange for this generous monthly allowance, you will sign the ironclad non-disclosure agreement attached to the back. You will never speak about my finances, my relationship with Chloe, or our marriage to the press. You will vanish completely. If you violate the NDA, I will tie you up in litigation until you are sleeping on the pavement. $1,000 a month, I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. For 2 children. It is more than you deserve, Beatrice snapped, stepping forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with my abuser. You should be thanking him on your hands and knees for offering you anything at all after you abandoned your duties as a wife. You failed Darren, and you failed this family. But Darren's predatory divorce settlement was only the first half of their ambush. My mother reached into her designer handbag and retrieved a second manila envelope. She pulled out a crisp legal document and slid it aggressively across the glass table, right next to Darren's papers. This is a retroactive quitclaim deed, Beatrice commanded, tapping the signature line with her manicured fingernail. Your grandmother was completely senile when she drafted that will. She had no business leaving prime downtown real estate to someone as irresponsible as you. Your father and I have decided to restructure the church assets to protect our family legacy. We are legally transferring the commercial property into a trust managed by the ministry. I stared down at the document. It was a masterpiece of legal coercion designed entirely to legitimize the toxic mortgage my father had illegally executed. They needed my actual signature to backdate the transfer and permanently erase his felony forgery. The sheer audacity was stunning. They had already stolen my inheritance, leveraged it to pay off loan sharks for Jamal, and now they were trying to force me to sign away the very land they had already plundered. You are going to sign both of these documents right now, right here in this room, Jamal added, puffing out his chest. We are done playing games with you, Maya. You sign the papers, you take your little monthly allowance from Darren, and you disappear. And what if I decline? I asked, tilting my head slightly. My father took a menacing step forward, his imposing physical presence filling the space. If you refuse to sign these papers, you will never work a single day in Atlanta again. Calvin threatened, his voice dropping to a vicious rumble. I have the mayor eating out of my hand. I have half the city council sitting in my front pews. Darren controls the corporate sector. We will blacklist your little crisis management hobby so thoroughly that you will not even be able to get a job pouring coffee in this state. We will crush you until you are begging us for shelter. You have absolutely no leverage, Maya. You are nothing. They stared at me, waiting for the inevitable collapse. They expected tears. They expected me to drop to my knees and plead for mercy. They expected the broken woman they had thrown out into the rain to finally surrender and accept her defeat. I looked down at the predatory divorce agreement that offered pennies for my children's survival. I looked at the retroactive quitclaim deed designed to absolve my father of federal fraud. I thought about the holding company I controlled, the millions of dollars in toxic debt I currently owned, and the encrypted flash drive Silas had plugged into the master servers. I let the silence stretch out, allowing their threats to echo into the void. Then I slowly raised my left arm and looked down at my diamond watch. The hands indicated it was exactly time for the keynote presentation. I did not scream. I did not argue. I did not tell them that I already owned the roof over their heads. I simply picked up the wireless production headset resting on the edge of the table and slid it over my ear. I looked directly into my father's eyes and offered a smile that promised absolute total devastation. Let me go cue the family tribute video, I said. The night of the gala arrived with a suffocating wave of expensive perfume and flashing camera bulbs. The sanctuary had been completely transformed into a sprawling ballroom dripping in crystal and gold. Atlanta elite poured through the main double doors in a steady stream of tailored tuxedos and custom designer gowns. The mayor was holding court near the towering ice sculptures, while the governor shook hands by the tiered champagne fountains. Local media outlets had set up interview stations along the velvet rope, eager to capture the 35th anniversary of Pastor Calvin's supposedly blessed ministry. I timed my entrance with absolute calculated precision. I did not arrive through the service elevator or the hidden catering corridors. I walked right through the main front doors. I had discarded the baggy sweaters and scuffed sneakers. Tonight, I wore a custom-tailored emerald silk gown that clung to my frame like liquid glass. It was a masterpiece of European design paired with diamond drop earrings and a matching necklace that caught the chandelier light with blinding intensity. My hair was styled in sleek dark waves and my makeup was flawless. I looked exactly like the apex predator I had become. The moment I stepped onto the red carpet, the entire foyer seemed to freeze. I walked past the media stations with a confident, unhurried grace. My family was grouped near the primary photo backdrop, greeting the ultra-wealthy donors and posing for the society pages. My mother Beatrice happened to glance toward the entrance and her jaw literally dropped. The practiced society smile vanished from her face completely. She stared at the emerald silk and the dripping diamonds, trying to frantically compute how the daughter she believed was destitute could afford to look like a billionaire. She recovered quickly, snapping instantly into damage control mode. Beatrice abandoned the city councilman she was speaking to and marched directly toward me. Her eyes darted around the room to see if anyone important was watching her disgraced daughter. "Maya, what on earth are you wearing?" she hissed, grabbing my forearm with a vice-like grip. "Did you empty your pathetic little savings account just to rent a dress and show off tonight? You are supposed to be working, not parading around like you belong here. You are making a spectacle of yourself." I looked down at her hand, gripping my arm, and offered a razor-thin smile. "I am just dressing for the occasion, Mom. We would not want the help looking sloppy in front of the governor." Beatrice scoffed, pulling me forcefully away from the glittering epicenter of the room. "You are causing a massive distraction. Get out of the main sightlines right now before you humiliate us." She marched me past the premium VIP tables, past the towering silver centerpieces, and the imported floral arrangements. We walked all the way to the absolute back of the cavernous ballroom. She shoved me toward table 14. It was a tiny, cramped circular table, pushed flush against the swinging kitchen doors and entirely obstructed by a massive concrete pillar. It was the absolute worst seat in the entire building, reserved strictly for the hired audiovisual crew and the overflow staff. Silas was already sitting there wearing his black polo shirt and casually monitoring his encrypted tablet. "Sit here and do not move unless there is a catering emergency," Beatrice commanded, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I do not want you ruining this night for your brother and sister. Stay out of sight and do your job." She turned on her heel and hurried back to the flashing cameras, desperate to reclaim her position in the spotlight. I sat down next to Silas, smoothing out my silk skirt. He glanced at my diamonds and then at the concrete pillar completely blocking our view of the main floor. "Nice seats," he murmured, tapping his screen to run a final diagnostic check on the proxy servers. "The best in the house," I replied, keeping my eyes fixed on the distant stage. From this shadowy corner, I had a perfect vantage point to watch the entire ballroom without being observed. The ballroom continued to fill with the wealthiest citizens of Atlanta. The noise level rose into a deafening roar of clinking crystal and polite laughter. Then the main doors opened and the atmosphere shifted. Darren walked into the room. He wore a sharp, bespoke tuxedo and carried himself with the smug, untouchable arrogance of a man who believed he had successfully destroyed his only obstacle. Clinging tightly to his arm was Chloe. She wore a pale pink maternity gown that prominently displayed her growing stomach. She looked impossibly smug, gazing around the room as if she had just inherited a kingdom. I sat perfectly still in the shadows of table 14, taking a slow sip of my sparkling water. The ice clinked against the rim of my glass as I watched my family react to the arrival of my cheating ex-husband. Any normal family would have turned him away at the door. Any decent father would have thrown the man who discarded his daughter and grandchildren out into the street. But my family did not possess an ounce of decency. They possessed only an insatiable hunger for money and status. Darren was a highly respected financial leader and a major donor to the church building fund. That made him absolute royalty in their eyes. My father, Pastor Calvin practically sprinted across the ballroom to greet them. He threw his arms open wide and pulled Darren into a massive theatrical embrace. "It is so good to see you, my boy." Calvin boomed, his voice echoing over the crowd. "We are so incredibly blessed that you could join us tonight. Thank you for your continued generosity to the ministry." Darren smiled, returning the embrace and shaking my father's hand. "I would not miss it, Calvin. You know I always support the church." Beatrice hurried over right behind her husband. She bypassed Darren entirely and went straight for Chloe. My mother wrapped her arms around the woman who had helped destroy my marriage, pressing her cheek against Chloe's pale pink dress. "You look absolutely radiant, Chloe," Beatrice gushed, stepping back to admire her pregnant belly. "Motherhood truly agrees with you. We are just so thrilled for you both. It is such a blessing." The sheer level of betrayal was staggering. My mother was fawning over the pregnant mistress, while her actual grandchildren were kept a closely guarded secret, hidden away from her elite social circle. I watched Silas tense beside me, his fingers hovering over his tablet, but I remained completely relaxed. The more rope they took, the tighter the noose would become. Nia joined the welcoming committee a moment later. My older sister glided across the floor with her plastic surgeon husband in tow. Nia let out a loud, dramatic gasp as she took Chloe's hand. "Oh my goodness, look at that rock!" Nia practically shrieked, ensuring that everyone at the surrounding tables could hear her. "Darren, you truly outdid yourself. That engagement ring is absolutely stunning. It is so much better than the tiny little thing you gave Maya. You two are just the perfect couple." Chloe blushed and held up her left hand, letting the massive diamond catch the chandelier light. "Darren just wanted to make sure I had the very best," Chloe simpered, leaning into his shoulder. "He takes such good care of us." Jamal and Kiara materialized next, completing the sickening family reunion. Jamal clapped Darren on the shoulder, laughing loudly at some unheard joke, while Kiara complimented Chloe's hair. They formed a tight, exclusive circle of wealth and hypocrisy, standing directly in the center of the ballroom for all the media cameras to capture. They paraded their alliance with my abuser, treating him like the true son of the family, while acting as if I had simply ceased to exist. I watched the entire grotesque scene unfold from my obstructed seat by the kitchen doors. I took another slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water, letting the cool liquid slide down my throat. I felt no sorrow. I felt no heartbreak. The gaping wound they had left in my chest had healed into something hard and impenetrable. They were putting on a flawless performance of elite unity, completely unaware that the floorboards beneath them were soaked in gasoline. I looked over at Silas. He had accessed the main church network and brought up the master control panel on his encrypted tablet. The 4 massive screens above the stage were currently displaying the glittering 35th anniversary logo. The live feed was primed and waiting for my command. "Are we ready, Silas?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper over the roar of the gala. Silas locked his dark eyes on the stage and smiled a dangerous, predatory grin. "The Trojan horse is in position, Maya. We own the screens. We own the audio. Just say the word." I set my glass down on the table. "Let them finish their appetizers," I murmured. "I want them to have a full stomach when the world collapses." I turned on my heel and walked out of the soundproofed VIP suite without looking back. I left the heavy oak door open behind me, letting the deafening roar of the ballroom flood the tense silence they had tried to weaponize. They did not follow me. They were too stunned by my complete lack of compliance, too arrogant to realize that my calm demeanor was not a symptom of defeat, but the absolute certainty of an apex predator closing its jaws. I glided through the service corridors, my emerald silk gown brushing against the concrete floors, until I reached the back of the massive sanctuary. I took my seat at table 14, stepping behind the concrete pillar and sliding into the chair next to Silas. He handed me a sleek black microphone headset. I secured it over my dark waves and adjusted the mouthpiece. On the main floor, the catering staff began clearing the imported lobster tails and filet mignon. The lights in the colossal auditorium dimmed to a dramatic deep blue, signaling the transition to the evening main event. A hush fell over the thousands of attendees. The mayor took his seat at the front table, adjusting his tie. The governor leaned forward, resting his elbows on the white silk tablecloth. Every local media outlet had their cameras locked and focused on the center of the stage. The grand pipe organ played a swelling, triumphant chord, and the follow spotlights converged on the mahogany podium. My father stepped into the blinding light. Pastor Calvin looked every inch the divine patriarch. He wore a custom-tailored tuxedo that cost more than most of his parishioners earned in a year, and a benevolent, humble smile that he had practiced in the mirror for decades. He gripped the edges of the podium and bowed his head, allowing the applause to wash over him in a thunderous wave. He let the adulation stretch out for a long, agonizing minute, feeding his colossal ego, before he finally raised his hands to quiet the massive room. "Thank you, my brothers and sisters," Calvin boomed, his rich baritone voice echoing flawlessly through the concert grade line arrays. "We are gathered here tonight to celebrate 35 years of unwavering faith, 35 years of absolute integrity. We have built this ministry on the bedrock of transparency, honesty, and family values. Look around this magnificent room. We are surrounded by the pillars of our great city. We have achieved this monumental success not through deception or shortcuts, but through walking the righteous path. God demands truth from His servants, and this family, the family you have trusted with your spiritual and financial support, has always operated in the absolute light of day." I stared at his projected face on the side monitors, listening to the sickening stream of lies flowing effortlessly from his lips. He spoke passionately about charitable giving, wrapping his embezzlement in the sacred cloth of divine purpose. He thanked the wealthy donors sitting in the front rows, assuring them their contributions were building a legacy of purity and grace. The sheer audacity of his performance was breathtaking. He was a master manipulator standing on a stage funded by stolen inheritances and anonymous shell corporations preaching about the rewards of a pure heart. "And now," my friend's Calvin continued, his voice dropping to a theatrical, reverent whisper, "my beautiful family has prepared a special presentation, a visual tribute honoring the legacy of this church and the sacrifices we have made together to build this empire of faith. Please direct your attention to the screens above." The ballroom erupted into polite, eager applause. The follow spotlights cut to black, leaving the stage in darkness. I looked at Silas. He had his finger hovering over the glowing red enter key on his encrypted tablet. He locked eyes with me and gave a sharp nod. "Hit it," I commanded. Silas tapped the screen. The 4 colossal 500-inch LED displays suspended above the sanctuary flared to life with blinding white intensity. But the screens did not show a nostalgic montage of my father's early ministry. There was no sweeping orchestral music, no soft focus photographs of our family smiling in their Sunday best. Instead, a massive high-definition image of a Chase Bank corporate ledger materialized across all 4 screens simultaneously. The document was blown up to gargantuan proportions, making the bold red text and highlighted routing numbers impossible to ignore. The ballroom fell into a state of profound, confused silence. The attendees stared up at the screens, trying to comprehend the dense financial data suddenly looming over them. I pressed the activation button on my headset. Silas had routed my microphone directly into the main PA system, bypassing the church audio engineers entirely. "Good evening, Atlanta!" I said, my voice booming from the ceiling speakers with crystal-clear, lethal precision. My tone was smooth, calm, and utterly devoid of mercy. "Welcome to the Real 35th Anniversary presentation. Pastor Calvin spoke to you tonight about transparency and family values. I think it is only fitting that we take a perfectly transparent look at exactly how those values are being funded." A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. Down in the front row, I saw my father freeze in the dark. I saw Beatrice clutch her designer handbag, her head snapping frantically toward the control booth. But they could not see me, hidden behind the pillar. "Let us begin with the crown jewel of the family real estate portfolio," I announced, tapping a command on my secondary monitor. The giant screens flashed, transitioning to a new set of documents. Two side-by-side ledgers appeared. On the left was the official church donation registry, showing a massive influx of cash from the congregation building fund. On the right was a private offshore banking statement belonging to a shell company named Apex Holdings. You are looking at exactly $800,000 of dedicated church donations, I narrated, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Money given by this congregation to build a new community center for underprivileged youth. But as you can see by the highlighted routing numbers, those funds never reached the community center. They were wired directly into Apex Holdings. And who owns Apex Holdings? The screen flashed again. A state business registration document appeared displaying a photograph of my brother alongside his legally binding signature. Jamal stood up from his VIP table, his face draining of all color. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine. That $800,000 was used to prevent Jamal from defaulting on his Buckhead mansion, I stated, letting the cold, hard facts strike the audience like physical blows. The screen shifted to display the exact mortgage payment receipts, the property deeds, and a highly detailed list of luxury car leases. It paid for the custom velvet suit he is wearing tonight. It paid for the leased gold Rolex on his wrist. It paid for his wife designer shoes, while this congregation was told to sacrifice their hard-earned paychecks for the glory of the ministry. The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. The polite silence shattered instantly, replaced by a deafening roar of outrage, shock, and disbelief. The wealthy donors in the front rows began shouting, pointing up at the undeniable proof displayed in 20-foot-tall letters. The politicians scrambled. I watched the mayor forcefully push his chair back and signal his security detail, desperate to distance himself from the radioactive scandal exploding around him. The media stations went into a frenzy. Camera operators abandoned the velvet rope and sprinted down the aisles, swinging their lenses toward the screens and then directly at Jamal. "Turn it off!" my father bellowed from the stage, his pastoral facade completely destroyed. He waved his arms wildly at the glass-enclosed AV booth. "Cut the feed. Cut the power right now." The church audio engineers were frantically slamming buttons on their soundboards, but Silas had locked them out completely. Our proxy server held the entire system hostage. The screens remained brightly lit, glaring down on the panicked elite. Kiara let out a shrill, piercing scream. She threw her hands over her face, trying to hide from the flashing camera bulbs descending upon their table. Jamal was frozen in pure, unadulterated terror. The arrogant real estate mogul who had strutted through the dress rehearsal demanding follow spotlights and perfectly positioned microphones was now trembling uncontrollably. He looked up at the screens, watching his entire fabricated life, his fake wealth, his fraudulent businesses, and his stolen dignity being broadcast to the most powerful people in the state. He tried to take a step back, but the crowd of furious donors and eager journalists had already swarmed his table. He was trapped in the blinding glare of the truth. I sat in the shadows of table 14, watching the guillotine fall exactly as I had designed. I took a slow breath, letting the sweet, chaotic sound of their destruction wash over me. The masterstroke had only just begun. I tapped the screen on my tablet, loading the next set of files. It was time to show Darren exactly what a broken woman could do. "Silas," I murmured into the headset. "Cue the forged mortgage documents. Let us show the governor how my father paid for his private jet." Silas smiled, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The screens flashed again, plunging the ballroom deeper into the abyss. There was no escape for any of them. The doors were locked, and the spotlight was finally shining in the right direction. The 500-inch monitors above the stage abruptly wiped the church logo away. Instead of a nostalgic montage honoring my father and his early ministry, the screens flared to life with blinding white intensity. A massive high-definition image of a Chase Bank corporate ledger materialized across all 4 displays simultaneously. My voice echoed through the concert-grade speakers, washing over the stunned crowd with icy, absolute authority. "Welcome to the real 35th anniversary presentation," I announced. "Pastor Calvin just spoke to you about transparency and family values. I think it is only fitting that we take a perfectly transparent look at exactly how those values are being funded. Let us begin with the crown jewel of the family real estate portfolio. The screens flashed transitioning with lethal speed to display a complex web of bank transfers. Bright red arrows connected the megachurch main donation accounts directly to a private offshore banking statement belonging to a shell company named Apex Holdings. Beside that, an official state business registration document appeared displaying a photograph of my brother, alongside his legally binding signature. You are looking at exactly $800,000 of dedicated church donations, I narrated, letting the words land like hammer blows. Money given by this congregation to build a new community center for underprivileged youth. But those funds never reached the community center. They were wired directly to Jamal and Kiara to prevent them from defaulting on their Buckhead mansion. The screen shifted to display the exact mortgage payment receipts and a highly detailed list of luxury car leases. It paid for the custom velvet suit Jamal is wearing tonight. It paid for his leased gold Rolex. It paid for Kiara designer shoes while this congregation sacrificed their paychecks for the glory of the ministry. The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. The polite silence shattered instantly, replaced by a deafening roar of outrage. Kiara let out a shrill, piercing scream, throwing her hands over her face to hide from the flashing camera bulbs descending upon their table. Jamal froze in pure, unadulterated terror, his arrogant smirk melting into a mask of absolute panic. "But we are not finished," I said, cutting through the noise. "Let us shift our attention to the man of the hour." The screens wiped again, displaying a crisp, scanned image of a commercial mortgage agreement. My signature was perfectly legible at the bottom of the page, but it was completely fraudulent. Next to the forged document, Silas displayed the forensic handwriting analysis and the official police reports. "Pastor Calvin stole my grandmother's property," I continued. "He forged my signature on a commercial deed to secure a massive illegal loan. When the loan sharks demanded their money, he drained the megachurch building fund to cover his own tracks. He embezzled millions of dollars from the single mothers, the working families, and the faithful parishioners who trusted him. Every single brick of this beautiful sanctuary is built on lies, fraud, and theft." My father's face contorted into a mask of feral rage. He slapped his hands against the mahogany podium, shouting furiously into the gooseneck microphone. His mouth was moving frantically, but no sound came out. Silas had already severed his audio feed, rendering him entirely mute. "Turn it off!" Calvin bellowed, his unamplified voice barely carrying past the first row. He pointed a trembling finger toward the glass-enclosed control booth. "Security, get up there and cut the power. Break down the doors right now." A half-dozen church ushers and venue security guards scrambled down the center aisle, rushing toward the audiovisual booth. They were met by a solid, impenetrable wall of muscle. The private security detail I had heavily vetted had seamlessly transitioned into their secondary role. They wore generic black event suits with hidden earpieces standing shoulder to shoulder at the bottom of the booth staircase. When the church ushers tried to push past them, my security team did not even flinch. They physically blocked every possible access point, creating an ironclad perimeter around Silas and our proxy servers. "Let them through!" Calvin screamed, stumbling down the altar stairs. "I demand you cut those screens!" No one moved. The elite donors were calling their lawyers. Politicians were actively fleeing toward the emergency exits, desperate to avoid the media cameras capturing my father's historic downfall. Beatrice had collapsed into a chair, clutching her chest as her precious high society reputation disintegrated into ash. I looked across the chaotic ballroom and locked my eyes on the VIP section. Darren was standing perfectly still, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting toward the exits. He thought his corporate lawyers and offshore accounts insulated him. He was about to learn I had saved the most lethal strike for him. I tapped my headset. "Silas," I whispered, "drop the corporate files." The monitors wiped the church ledgers away, replacing them with a towering display of Darren's highly classified corporate tax returns. Side-by-side comparisons filled the screens, showing massive discrepancies between his reported revenue and millions of dollars funneled through phantom vendors. I displayed the exact Cayman Islands routing numbers and the illegal stock transfers that funded his lavish lifestyle. "Do not think you are leaving this party early, Darren," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm register. The camera operators instantly swiveled their lenses away from my father and locked them directly onto Darren. Darren presented himself to this city as a titan of finance, I announced. But for the last 5 years, he has been systematically embezzling millions from his own investors, laundering the stolen capital through the very same offshore shell companies my father used. He is a fraud, a thief, and a federal criminal. Darren's face went chalk white. He grabbed Chloe by the arm and tried to drag her toward the side service doors. "You cannot run, Darren," I said, tracking him across the room. "I spent the last 6 months building a geopolitical crisis management firm. When I uncovered your massive embezzlement ring, I shared the receipts with a very grateful United States Senator who sits on the Banking Oversight Committee. She was more than happy to pass my encrypted files directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Right on cue, the heavy oak double doors at the main entrance violently burst open. A squad of federal agents wearing tactical jackets emblazoned with the bright yellow letters FBI marched into the sanctuary. They moved with terrifying precision, cutting through the panicked crowd of billionaires like a hot knife through butter. The local police officers immediately stepped back, clearing a wide path. Darren froze in his tracks. Chloe let out a blood-curdling shriek as 4 federal agents surrounded their table. She backed away, clutching her pregnant stomach, tears streaming down her face. The man who had promised to wrap her in diamonds was currently being spun around and forced against the catered buffet table. "Darren, do something!" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Call your lawyers." But Darren had no lawyers left. His firm partners were already in the crowd, physically distancing themselves from his toxic fallout. The lead FBI agent pulled Darren's arms behind his back, and the sharp metallic click of steel handcuffs echoed through the sudden localized silence around his table. They read him his Miranda rights right there in front of the media. I stepped out from behind the concrete pillar and walked slowly down the center aisle, my emerald silk gown trailing behind me. The crowd parted, allowing me to pass. I walked straight up to Darren as the agents were leading him away. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and profound defeat. He finally realized the woman he thought he had buried had been the one digging his grave. "You can keep the $1,000. Darren," I whispered, a cold, victorious smile spreading across my face. "You are going to need it for the commissary. Checkmate." The FBI agents hauled Darren through the heavy oak doors, his tailored tuxedo wrinkling, as they shoved him roughly into the back of a waiting black SUV. The ballroom was a spectacular disaster zone of fleeing elites and snapping camera shutters. Wealthy donors knocked over velvet-lined chairs in their desperate rush to escape the flashing bulbs, terrified that their own names might be dragged into the federal spotlight. The mayor had already sprinted out the side exit. The governor had vanished completely. Only my family remained stranded and exposed in the exact center of the glittering wreckage they had built. Pastor Calvin's face was a mottled, terrifying shade of purple. He scrambled down the altar steps, his polished pastoral demeanor entirely shattered. He charged down the center aisle toward me, his hands balled into tight fists, sweat pouring down his forehead and soaking the collar of his expensive silk shirt. Beatrice and Jamal hurried right behind him, their faces twisted in a grotesque mixture of panic and rage. Calvin stopped mere inches from me, his chest heaving as he pointed a trembling finger at my face. "You arrogant, ungrateful wretch," he screamed, his voice cracking with pure hysteria. "You think this makes you powerful. You think you have won anything tonight. You just destroyed your own flesh and blood. You ruined this family for absolutely nothing. The media will have a field day, but tomorrow morning the banks are going to foreclose on this entire sanctuary. The corporate lenders are going to seize Jamal's house. They are going to freeze all the accounts. The banks are going to strip everything we have, so you get absolutely nothing. We all go down together. You burned the house down while we were all still inside." I stood my ground. my emerald silk gown catching the chandelier light as I looked at the pathetic, sweating man who had stolen my grandmother's legacy. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply let his desperate, terrifying realization hang in the cold air. I smiled a genuine, terrifying smile that made Beatrice physically recoil in fear. I reached up and tapped the microphone headset still resting against my cheek. "The bank is not seizing a single brick, Calvin," I said, my voice slicing through the chaos and echoing like thunder through the empty, cavernous sanctuary. "The corporate lenders you are so terrified of do not hold your notes anymore. A Investments bought every single one of your toxic loans last month. I bought Jamal predatory mortgages. I bought Kiara massive credit card debt. I purchased the forged commercial deed for this very church. You are not dealing with a faceless private equity firm. You are dealing with me. I am your sole creditor." The color drained from Jamal's face so fast he looked like a corpse. Kiara let out a strangled gasp, clamping her hands over her mouth as her knees buckled. Calvin's jaw fell open, his eyes darting frantically as the lethal trap finally snapped shut around his throat. I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a glacial, unyielding whisper. "You have exactly 72 hours to vacate my properties. If you leave a single piece of trash behind, I will have you arrested for trespassing. Get out of my building." 6 months later, the dust had finally settled over the ashes of their fraudulent empire. The fallout was absolute and spectacular. Darren was sitting in a minimum security federal penitentiary, serving a mandatory 10-year sentence for corporate embezzlement and wire fraud. His offshore accounts had been frozen and seized by the federal government. Chloe had abandoned him the very moment his assets were locked, leaving him to face the crushing reality of his criminal choices entirely alone. Jamal and Kiara were no longer parading around in custom velvet suits and leased designer cars. Stripped of their Buckhead mansion and their fake prestige, they were currently renting a cramped, rat-infested two-bedroom apartment on the worst side of town. Kiara was forced to clip coupons and ride the city bus to a minimum-wage retail job. It was the exact miserable existence they had so gleefully wished upon me. Calvin and Beatrice suffered the steepest fall from grace. The megachurch had been completely liquidated to cover the massive debts they owed my holding company. My father lost his congregation, his television ministry, and his untouchable social standing. He and my mother were drowning under the weight of intense federal scrutiny, fighting endless legal battles just to stay out of a prison cell. Their names were absolute poison in Atlanta society. They had absolutely nothing left to steal. I was sitting on the sun-drenched travertine terrace of my sprawling private estate. The warm afternoon breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine and the sound of pure, unadulterated joy. I took a slow sip of freshly squeezed lemonade and smiled, watching Mia and Zoe splashing in our massive infinity pool. They were thriving, laughing loudly as they played a ridiculous game of water volleyball. They lacked absolutely nothing. They were completely safe, protected by a fortress of legal and financial security that I had built from the ground up. My crisis management firm had become an unstoppable geopolitical weapon, but my greatest triumph was the absolute peace radiating through my home. My encrypted personal cell phone vibrated on the glass patio table. The screen displayed an unknown caller identification. I set my glass down and casually swiped to answer the call. Maya, a fragile, trembling voice, wept through the speaker. It was Beatrice. Her tone was completely stripped of its former arrogance, replaced by the pathetic, desperate whine of a woman who had run out of victims. "Maya, please do not hang up. Your father and I are struggling so much. We have nothing. We realize we made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but we are still your family. Please, we just want a second chance at being a family. We can fix this. Just give us a chance to make it right." I sat there in the warm sunlight, looking out at the crystal-clear water and the smiling faces of my beautiful children. I listened to my mother sobbing, begging for the very mercy she had repeatedly denied me when I was standing in the rain. I let her cry for a brief, agonizing moment. "Just wait," I replied, my voice completely flat and devoid of any emotion. I pulled the phone away from my ear, pressed the red button to end the call, and permanently blocked the number. The screen faded to black. I slipped the phone into my pocket, stood up from my chair, and walked down to the pool to join my family.